As an adult, Elena returns to her hometown to settle her late parents' affairs. While sorting through their belongings, she finds a journal belonging to her younger brother, Alex, who disappeared in the woods 10 years ago. The journal entries detail Alex's growing obsession with Slender Man, culminating in a final entry that hints at a ritual to summon the entity. Finally, Elena arrives at the altar, where she finds the remains of past sacrifices, including her brother's possessions. In a horrifying realization, she understands that the ritual described in the journal wasn't just to summon Slender Man, it was to bind a piece of him to a living person. Alex had unknowingly tied his fate to the creature, and now it wanted Elena to do the same. As the whispers grow louder, Elena fights to resist the pull of the ritual. She burns the journal and attempts to escape, but the woods seem to close in on her. Slender Man appears, towering over her, but instead of killing her, he offers her a choice: continue the ritual and join her brother in eternal servitude, or leave and forever be haunted by the knowledge of what she had uncovered. The first time I heard about the game, I was sitting with my friends around a flickering campfire, deep in the woods outside our town. We were all just bored teenagers, looking for something to do, and Ryan, the most adventurous among us, brought it up like it was just a casual challenge. "You've heard of the Slender Man, right?" he asked, his voice low and serious. "There's a game you can play to see him, but it's not for the faint of heart." We all leaned in closer, the fire casting long shadows over our faces. Ryan explained that the game required 4 players, and we had to enter the deepest part of the forest at midnight. Each person would take a turn walking alone down a path marked by ancient trees, without any light except for the full moon. The game was simple: walk until you hear something, see something, or feel something. If you do, you win. The prize: you get to come back. The idea seemed ridiculous, but we were all intrigued. We were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dark woods, and it was already close to midnight. Ryan's story was just scary enough to feel like a challenge, but not too scary to stop us from playing. After all, Slender Man was just a myth, right? The clock on my phone read 11:45 p.m. We all gathered our courage and made our way to the heart of the forest. The deeper we went, the quieter it became, until the only sounds were our footsteps and the occasional hoot of an owl. The trees stood like ancient sentinels, tall and foreboding, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers. When we finally reached the darkest part of the woods, we stopped. "Who's going first?" Ryan asked, his voice almost a whisper. There was a long silence before Sarah, the bravest among us, volunteered. She took a deep breath and started down the path, disappearing into the darkness. We waited. The seconds dragged on into minutes, and still, Sarah didn't return. My heart began to race. The air around us grew colder, and the silence was deafening. I wanted to call out to her, but my voice was stuck in my throat. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, Sarah reappeared. She was pale and trembling, but she was alive. "I saw him," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "He was just standing there, at the end of the path. He didn't move, didn't do anything. He just watched me." We all stared at her in disbelief. Ryan was the first to break the silence. "Your turn, James." James hesitated but didn't back down. He gave us a nervous smile before heading down the path. We watched him go, the shadows swallowing him whole. This time, it felt like hours passed before James came back. When he finally did, he looked different. His face was drawn, his eyes hollow. "He's real," James muttered, almost to himself. "He's waiting for us." Now it was my turn. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped onto the path. The trees seemed to close in around me, the darkness growing thicker with every step. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, made me jump. And then I saw him. He was standing just ahead of me, in the middle of the path, tall, unnaturally thin, with long, spindly arms that hung almost to the ground. His face, or what should have been his face, was a featureless white void. I wanted to run, to scream, but I was frozen in place, trapped by his gaze or the lack of it. The Slender Man didn't move, but I felt something pull at me, something that whispered to my deepest fears. I forced myself to take a step back, then another, and just like that, the spell was broken. I turned and ran, not stopping until I was back with my friends. Ryan was waiting for me, his expression unreadable. "Did you see him?" he asked. I nodded, too shaken to speak. Ryan didn't say anything else, but I could see the fear in his eyes. We decided to leave the woods immediately. The thrill of the game had turned into something much darker, something real. As we walked back, I felt like we were being watched, but every time I looked over my shoulder, there was nothing there. We never spoke of that night again, and we never went back to those woods. But sometimes, late at night, I think I see something moving out of the corner of my eye, something tall and thin, with no face. I don't know what we awakened in those woods, but I do know one thing: some games are better left unplayed. Story 2. The Lost Village. When I first heard about the Lost Village deep within the forest, I thought it was nothing more than a local legend. The old-timers in town loved to tell stories about it, warning anyone who would listen to stay away. They said it was cursed, that everyone who went there either disappeared or returned changed. But I was young, curious, and eager to prove myself. So when my friends suggested we find the village, I didn't hesitate. We packed our bags, grabbed our flashlights, and set off early one morning, determined to solve the mystery. The forest was thick, the trees towering above us, their branches creating a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. The further we went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air was heavy, filled with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. It felt like the forest was watching us, waiting for something. After hours of trekking, we found a clearing in the middle of the woods, with old, crumbling buildings scattered around. The village looked like it had been abandoned for centuries. The houses were little more than skeletons, their roofs caved in, walls covered in moss and ivy. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of wood or the rustle of leaves in the wind. We split up to explore, each of us taking a different part of the village. I found myself drawn to a large house at the edge of the clearing, its door hanging loosely on its hinges. Inside, the air was cold, and the darkness seemed almost alive. My flashlight flickered as I walked through the rooms, the beam catching glimpses of old furniture, broken and covered in dust. In one of the rooms, I found something strange: a set of drawings on the wall, crudely scratched into the plaster. They depicted a tall, thin figure with impossibly long arms and no face, standing among the trees. My heart skipped a beat. I had heard stories of the Slender Man, but I never believed them. Yet here he was, staring back at me from the wall. Suddenly, I heard a noise from outside, a low, guttural sound that sent chills down my spine. I rushed to the window, peering out into the clearing. My friends were nowhere to be seen. The village was empty, but the air was thick with a sense of dread. I stepped outside, calling for my friends, but there was no response. Panic began to set in. I started running through the village, searching every house, every corner, but they were gone. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. As I stood in the middle of the clearing, trying to figure out what to do, I felt a presence behind me. Slowly, I turned around, and there he was, the Slender Man. He stood at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by the shadows of the trees, his featureless face tilted as if he were watching me. My blood ran cold. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The Slender Man took a step forward, and that's when I snapped out of my trance. I turned and ran, not caring where I was going, just trying to get as far away as possible. The forest closed in around me, the trees blurring as I ran. I could feel him behind me, getting closer with every step. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop until I burst out of the woods, into the safety of the open field beyond. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. When I finally dared to look back, the forest was silent and still. There was no sign of the Slender Man, no sign of my friends. I made my way back to town, but no one believed my story. The police searched the woods but found nothing, no village, no friends, no evidence that we had ever been there. I never went back to those woods, and I never saw my friends again. But I know what I saw, and I know that something is still out there, waiting. The lost village may be hidden deep in the forest, but it has not forgotten, and neither is the Slender Man.